Let's talk about the actual problem with The Bride ! Written and directed by Maggie Gyllenhaal.
The Bride of Frankenstein.
No, just the bride.
The plot, because if you strip down everything, the costumes, visuals, the look how artistic we are energy, what you left off is one of the most confused Frankenstein stories ever put on screen. The premise should be simple. You have a Frankenstein monster, a tragic creature who wants companionship. Why he waited 100 years for this? No one knows. I guess he decided he wanted more complicated life. A scientist create the bride to be his partner. The setup is a classic gothic horror. Isolation, existential loneliness, the horror of being artificially created, but the movie almost immediately abandons that. Instead of exploring the psychological horror of the bride waking up in a world she didn't choose, the story pivots into something completely different. A weird crime romance road movie set in 1930s Chicago, and right away the tone starts collapsing. When the bride is resurrected, this should be the most important moment in the story. This is the emotional center. A woman who was murdered is brought back to life without her consent. How could you get a consent from a dead person? Don't think about it. She's stitched together from death. She's forced into existence. This should create questions like, who is she now? What does she want? Does she resent the monster? Does she resent the scientist? But instead of digging in those questions, the movie basically turns her into outlaw anti-hero almost immediately. She wakes up, gets her bearing, and suddenly the story becomes a strange rebellion adventure which kills the entire gothic horror foundation of the premise. In the most Frankenstein stories, the monster is tragic. He's lonely, misunderstood, dangerous, but sympathetic. But here, the dynamic becomes weirdly lopsided. The bride actually becomes the dominant personality in the story. Meanwhile, the monster, played by Christian Bale, feels like he's just orbiting her chaos. Dude, I hope you got paid for this. So the film stops being about the monster's longing for connection and becomes about the bride's chaotic rebellion, which fundamentally flips the emotional focus of the story, and not in a clever way, in a messy way. Then comes the strangest part of a movie. Instead of staying in a gothic horror territory, the plot drags the characters into gangster storyline in Chicago. Police are chasing them, there's a detective and his female assistant, but oh no, she is the brain of the operation and he is getting all the credit. Is everything okay at home, Jake? Blink twice if you need help. Detective then is ashamed of being misogynist or something and retires, gives the badge to his assistant, and she becomes a detective, because in 1930s you can become detective if someone just handed you a badge. There is also a bad guy silencing women by cutting their tongues out. I wish I was kidding, this is how subtle this movie is. They become a public spectacle. The bride starts turning into strange symbol of rebellion. At one point the movie feels like less Frankenstein and more like some bizarre monster Bonnie and Clyde story, which creates a massive tone problem, because the film can decide wherever it wants to be gothic tragedy, dark romance, gangster crime story, satire about society, so it becomes all of them at once and none of them work properly. Another huge problem with the story structure, the plot constantly feels like it's starting over. Just when you think the movie has found its direction, it pivots again. First about creation the bride, then it's about bride discovering herself, then it's about Christian Bale being a psychic to her, then it's about running from the law, then society reacting them. The narrative never locks on one central conflict, it keeps shifting, which makes the movie feels longer and more exhausting than it actually is. By the time the movie reaches its conclusion, you expect some kind of emotional resolution, maybe tragedy, maybe sacrifice, maybe a realization about what these characters mean to each other, but instead of ending feels vague and unresolved. The characters don't really complete clear arcs, the story doesn't land a strong thematic point, it just sort of ends, which is the worst possible outcome of a story built on such dramatic material. The biggest tragedy of The Bride! Isn't the box office, is the wasted potential, because the Frankenstein myth is powerful for a reason. It's about creation, loneliness, identity, responsibility, but this movie buries those themes under a plot that keeps changing direction. Instead of one strong story, you get a collection of the half-finished ideas stitched together. Ironically, the movie ends up feeling like the creature itself, a bunch of pieces sewn together that never quite comes alive.